Many times communication seems like something natural, something we do without thinking too much. We talk, we listen, we respond, and everything appears to happen effortlessly. However, over time, I discovered that communication is not just about speaking words, but about building a real connection between people. I came to understand this through experiences that made me reflect, make mistakes, correct myself, and most importantly, grow. When I was younger, I used to think that if I spoke fast and a lot, I would be listened to. I believed that whoever spoke the loudest was right. At home, I always defended my opinions passionately, without giving others the chance to express themselves. I remember how my mother often told me, "You don't have to speak first. You have to understand first." At that time, it sounded like just another adult phrase, but with time, I realized how much wisdom it contained. The first moment that made me seriously think about how I communicate was a misunderstanding with a close friend. I said something as a joke, but he took it as an insult. There was tension between us for days, and I couldn't understand why a simple joke had such an effect. Later, when we finally talked openly, he told me, "It wasn't your words that hurt me. It was your tone." I thought about that for a long time. I realized that my voice, my gestures, and my facial expressions send messages as powerful as the words themselves. That was my first step toward understanding that nonverbal language is crucial. I started paying more attention to myself. When I talked to someone, I tried to observe their reactions, their eyes, their smile, their silence. I discovered that people don't react only to what you say, but to how you say it. I began to adjust my tone, to speak more slowly, to be clearer, and most importantly, to be truly present in the conversation. That is when I learned what it means to listen actively, not just to stay quiet until it is your turn to speak, but to genuinely try to understand what the other person feels and thinks. Another turning point came during high school, when I was elected class representative. It was the first time I had to speak in front of a larger group and express not only my own opinions, but also those of my classmates. At first, it felt like an impossible mission. How could I represent everyone without making someone feel ignored? In the beginning, I received criticism. Some said I talked too much, others said I didn't speak up enough. I felt trapped between two worlds. That's when I learned an essential lesson. Communication is not about always being right, but about finding balance. I began organizing short discussions with my classmates before meetings, asking them directly for their opinions and taking notes. I noticed that when people feel listened to, they become more cooperative. Over time, the atmosphere in the class changed. Instead of complaints, there were constructive suggestions. I started applying the same principles in my personal relationships. I realized that many conflicts come not from a lack of love or goodwill, but from a lack of understanding. How many times had I said something with good intentions, only to be misunderstood? Or thought I had been clear, when in fact my message was ambiguous? In those moments, I learned that a good communicator must also be a good observer. I also had the opportunity to work in a mixed group with people of different ages and experiences. At first, I felt intimidated. Each person had their own way of speaking and their own rhythm. Some were fast and firm, others preferred silence. It was hard for me to fit in. But after a few meetings, I began to realize that what unites people is not how they speak, but the intention behind their words. When you speak with respect, even a different opinion can be accepted. I also had to learn emotional control. Sometimes when I was angry or stressed, words came out too quickly, and I regretted them immediately. I realized that in tense situations, it's not good to react impulsively. Effective communication requires patience and self-control. I began to take a deep breath, to pause for a few seconds before responding. Many times, those few seconds made the difference between a conflict and a calm discussion. Another key step was discovering empathy. I understood that I couldn't communicate well if I didn't try to see the world through another person's eyes. When I started truly listening to people's stories and emotions, I noticed that my way of speaking changed too. I no longer tried to win a conversation, but to reach mutual understanding. Empathy taught me that each person has their own reality, and sometimes a simple question. "How are you feeling?" means more than a long speech. In another context, I was part of an online communication project. There, I learned that the virtual world has its own rules. The lack of eye contact and tone of voice can make messages easily misunderstood. After a few unpleasant experiences, I decided to be more careful about how I wrote my messages. I learned to use clearer language, to avoid ambiguous expressions, and to reread my texts before sending them. Small details make a big difference when you want to avoid confusion. At the same time, I started reading about interpersonal communication and emotional intelligence. I was especially drawn to the ideas behind nonviolent communication, which is based on respect, empathy, and sincerity. I realized that sometimes you don't need to change what you say, only how you say it. Instead of saying, "You never understand anything," I can say, "Maybe I didn't explain it well. Let me try again." That small shift in attitude transformed many of my conversations. I also learned that sometimes silence is the best answer. There are situations when words can complicate things, and silence becomes a form of wisdom. When I learned not to respond to everything immediately, but to let time bring clarity, I discovered that many conflicts resolved themselves. Looking back, I realized that learning to communicate better didn't happen overnight. It was a long journey filled with attempts, reflections, and honest moments. I've learned that communicating well means being present, attentive, adaptable, and sincere. There's no perfect formula, but there is one attitude that makes all the difference: a genuine desire to understand others. Today, I can say that I feel more confident in the way I communicate. Not because I know everything, but because I know there's always more to learn. Communication is not a destination. It's a continuous process. Every conversation is an opportunity to understand myself better, and others too. I've learned that sometimes it takes courage to say what you feel, and other times it takes silence to truly listen. Sometimes you must admit that you were wrong, and other times you must be patient with those who don't understand you right away. But in all these situations, the key remains the same: respect. Respect for yourself and for the person in front of you. Communication isn't just about transmitting ideas, it's about building bridges between people. And step by step, I've learned to build those bridges with more care, understanding, and empathy.